Betty Andreasson Luca was repeatedly abducted from childhood on, but she always described her experience as religious. Inside alien spacecraft, she described angelic beings, and she even had an out of body experience during an alien abduction. Let's explore. Hi everyone, and welcome to Project Bluebook, where we explore all things unidentified. I am Thor, and thanks for tuning in. It's a well-documented case, so why even cover it? Well, it belongs in every lexicon that calls itself comprehensive when it comes to unexplained phenomena, and we do, but also we just covered in a recent episode the comparisons between alien abduction experiences and near-death experiences. Hers is the perfect case juxtaposing the similarities between these experiences. Betty Andreasson Luca passed away on March 18, 2022, at her daughter's home just about a year ago. It is therefore only fitting that we cover her story here and now. Betty was a religious woman, and when she encountered a being of intense light inside the craft, she called him, quote, the One, end quote, obviously tying its presence to her faith and belief system. This is important to keep in mind with any experiencer and eyewitness testimony, both in time and place. They filter the experience through their perspective and influence in this world. On a cold evening on January 25, 1967, Betty, 30 years old at the time, was in her kitchen in South Aspernem, Massachusetts. She had 7 children and parents, and all were present in the house with her, in the living room in fact, only a threshold away from the kitchen. At about 6:35 p.m., it's as if the house and everyone in it experienced a glitch in the matrix, as if time and light blinked out and then returned. Compare this to when the electricity momentarily goes down and restarts immediately, only this affected everything around her. With her senses heightened, she noticed a bright red-orange light shining in through the windows of her house. Everyone experienced it. The children started screaming. She tried to calm them down while her father rushed to the kitchen to look outside and see the source of this intense light. Was there a big truck parked outside, shining lights through the windows? We always look for rational explanations first. Then he saw a group of strange-looking small humanoids hopping towards the house. They didn't walk, they didn't hover, they hopped without moving their legs. 5 of the humanoids entered the house without opening a door. They just appeared through the closed wooden door as if it were a transparent gateway. One of them appeared to be about 5 feet tall, more elongated looking than the other 4, who were only about 4 feet in height. They had pear-shaped heads, a large elongated cranium, and eyes like cats that wrapped around the sides of the skull. They had pinholes for ears and noses, and their mouths were just a slither that didn't open, didn't move, did nothing. They had 3 long fingers on each side and wore dark blue uniforms, suits, she described. They looked in every detail like alien greys, one tall, the others short. Inside the house, to Betty, they seemed to be floating. Betty was suspended, frozen still, but she could see the creatures attending to her father in the middle of the kitchen floor. She had no idea what they were doing. At first she felt frightened, but then she calmed down, as if an injection of relaxation entered her body and mind. She was now just an observer, and their subject waiting for what happened next. They took her, and only her, outside, to a small craft resting against the hill at the back end of her backyard. She guessed later it was about 20 feet in diameter and no more than 8 feet tall. She described the craft as if 2 saucers had been put together, facing each other, one inverted on top of the other. They took off And the next thing she noticed was this transport craft entering another much larger craft, somewhere high above, parked above the clouds. As you absorb her story, remember that almost every single detail she has so far described, back in 1967, has been experienced by hundreds more before and after her experience, and all across the world, by adults, by children who had no prior memory or experience nor interest in acquiring such information. The detail is individualized, yet matches almost exactly with hundreds of other accounts of alien abductions. And so was what she described happened next. On board the craft, she underwent a physical examination involving multiple instruments, and thereafter she was subjected to a religious experience she later described. It was 10:40 at night when Betty found herself back in her own kitchen, escorted by two 4-feet-tall humanoids to meet her family, which was still in a state of suspended animation. It had been 4 hours since she left, and they were never aware of the visitors, nor that time had passed. Instead, they were escorted to their beds and put to sleep without ever realizing what had really happened that night. One humanoid had stayed behind to watch her family, and having put everyone to bed, literally, they all left, leaving Betty alone and by herself. She remembered only fractions of the experience, and that the escort told her that more memories and information were locked in her brain and would be unlocked and revealed to her at the right and appropriate times, sometime in the future. It is right to mention here that Betty had no prior knowledge of or interest in unexplained phenomena, aliens, or UFOs. She was a religious person, a church-going lady. Her universe consisted of family, church, and her hometown community, neighbors, store clerks, and so on. Her life had been simple. As a result, she accounted for the fractional memories as religious experiences, apparitions, sightings of angelic beings, and lights being cast on her from above by the divine. That's how she saw it at first. But in 1975, she got in touch with J. Allen Hynek after coming across an article about his UFO research. The article asked anyone with experience of the paranormal or unexplained phenomena to contact him, and she did, out of curiosity, she said, and not conviction. The article had intrigued her because she recognized some of the details. She wrote him a letter explaining what she remembered, but her detail was limited, and therefore her letter was filed away for 2 years until January 1977, when a more thorough investigation was afforded by Jules Valancourt of the Mutual UFO Network. She was visited by a team of specialists, a physicist, an electronics engineer, an aerospace engineer, a telecommunications specialist, and a UFO investigator. A hypnotist was also present, as well as a medical doctor trained in psychiatry. She was repeatedly interviewed over a 12-month period. She underwent at least 2 lie detector tests, passed them both, and her background was examined through a dozen or more hypnotic regressions. This included not only Betty herself, but also some of her family members, including her oldest daughter. They both described repeat abductions, small humanoid visitations, and medical examinations on board a spacecraft in the skies, and a transport pod shuttling them back and forth between Earth's surface and the mothership. And this had been going on since childhood for both of them. In the words of Valancourt, quote, "What I find most amazing is her ability to draw. The detail of the spacecraft and the beings she drew under hypnosis were such that it really made me believe." End quote. She even guided an architectural drawing of the interior of the pod as she experienced it. During one of her hypnotic regressions, Betty wandered back to her childhood, when as a little girl she had an encounter with a being engulfed in light. She had been taken on board a craft that she said flew to the ocean and submerged itself underwater, where she entered a cave-like tunnel, which should remind us of the account of Filiberto Cardenas. What she described next was stranger than fiction. She said she saw people in containers from different time periods and different cultures. They were see-through glass containers, lifelike and perfectly preserved. She said the walls were loaded with these containers, filled with people, inside the underwater base, like a human history museum. In another session, Betty wandered back to her childhood when, as a little girl, had an encounter with a being engulfed in light. She was just a little girl, perhaps 8 to 10 years old. The following is an exchange that took place on board a craft and is part of a 500-page report in existence on her case and hypnotic sessions at MUFON. And I quote, "Betty, we're coming up to this wall of glass and a big door. It's made out of glass also." Hypnotist: "Does it have hinges?" Betty: "No, it's big. It's so big, I can't explain it. It's door after door after door now. He, the little man," remember this is a child describing a humanoid creature through hypnosis, "he's telling me to stop. He says, 'Now you shall enter the door to see the one.' And he then says, 'Fear not.'" Betty continues, "And I'm starting there, and I'm coming out of myself. There's two of me here." My insert is that it appears Betty, as a child, is having an out-of-body experience, described in a way similar to what a near-death experiencer would. She is seeing her physical body separate and apart from her spiritual self. In the words of a child, "There is two of me here." Let's continue. Hypnotist: "Are you looking at yourself?" Betty: "Huh?" Hypnotist: "Have you tried to talk to your other self?" Betty: "That won't work because I'm over here and that one is over there." End quote. Betty goes on to describe another door, and behind it there's this corridor with an immensely bright light. The hypnotist wants to know what's behind that door, but Betty, through the mind of her childlike self, says she can't take her there. She can't take her beyond that door. No matter how the hypnotist tried to get a peek into the light, Betty resisted describing it. It's locked. Instead, Betty goes on to experience what I can't describe other than a spiritual bliss, a state of happiness and peace she can't translate to the hypnotist. She's engulfed in light, she says. She also described the humanoids physically in terms consistent with alien grace, the short ones and the tall ones, yet also remembers them turning into beings of light, that she herself too turned into a being of light when she exited her own body. This is incredibly hard to comprehend, as the boundaries between religious experiences and doctrines and the alien abduction experience, in the case of Betty Andreasson Luca, are completely blurred together, which is why her story is worth telling and knowing. What strikes me here is that this is a hypnotic regression of a person that has been abducted by aliens. What is being described, however, is exactly what an experiencer of a near-death experience describes, when they either recall without effort, and sometimes they do. Read Raymond Moody's NDE accounts, or Dr. Kenneth Ring's Heading Towards Omega, and then read the abduction account of Betty Andreasson Luca, verbatim, describing the exact same experience. So what does this mean? Are alien abductions a spiritual experience, or are religious experiences, the sighting of the Virgin Mary at Fatima, for example, actually an alien encounter? Are they one and the same? These questions are loaded and topics for multiple episodes. The messaging is the same, however. Go back and do good, and heal the planet. Tell them we exist. And invariably, the experiencer does just that. Even through the trauma of the experience itself, they and we are forever changed. You can watch and listen to this and other podcasts on Project Bluebook, where we explore all things unidentified. Each day, let's practice compassion and kindness. And please subscribe. I am Thor, and thanks for tuning in. See you next time.